You measure your worth by the eyes of others, and then wonder why it never feels stable. Recognition becomes your currency. Approval becomes your oxygen. And without it, you feel invisible, diminished, uncertain of who you are. This is the quiet trap, believing that being seen is the same as being valuable. You wait for acknowledgment to confirm your existence, for praise to justify your effort, for validation to settle your doubt. But every time you hand that authority outward, you weaken your own foundation. Because what is given by others can be withheld, distorted, or withdrawn without warning. The Stoic position is not indifferent to recognition, but it refuses to depend on it. Worth is not something granted. It is something exercised. And if your sense of self rises and falls with external response, then it was never yours to begin with. The question is no longer whether others see you, but whether you see yourself clearly. You begin with a simple equation: if others recognize me, I must be worthy. It feels logical. If people praise you, notice you, choose you, then surely that reflects something real, something measurable, something objective. But this equation contains a hidden flaw. It assumes that other people are reliable instruments of truth. They are not. Recognition is not a pure signal. It is filtered through bias, distraction, insecurity, preference, timing, and self-interest. One person ignores you because they are preoccupied. Another praises you because it benefits them. A third overlooks you entirely, not because you lack value, but because they lack perception. And yet, you take all of these inconsistent responses and treat them as data points about your worth. This is the distortion. You are trying to extract stability from something fundamentally unstable. You are building identity on a surface that shifts with every interaction. So your sense of self becomes reactive. Inflated when praised. Deflated when ignored. Anxious when uncertain. Dependent on signals you cannot control and cannot verify. This is not confidence. This is exposure. The Stoic correction is precise: what is outside your control cannot be the basis of your worth. Recognition belongs to others. It is their judgment, their perception, their choice. And anything that belongs to others is not yours to rely on. So the question becomes uncomfortable: if you remove recognition, what remains? Most people hesitate here. Because without external feedback, they feel disoriented. Effort begins to feel invisible. Progress feels unconfirmed. Identity feels unanchored. They have trained themselves to look outward for definition, so when that mirror is removed, they experience a kind of internal silence. But this silence is not emptiness. It is absence of noise. And in that absence, something more stable can emerge. Consider this: your actions, your discipline, your decisions, these exist whether or not they are seen. The work you complete in private does not lose its reality because no one applauds it. The restraint you exercise in a moment of anger does not become meaningless because it goes unnoticed. The clarity with which you think, the integrity with which you act, these are not dependent on witnesses. They are self-contained. Yet you have been conditioned to ignore what is self-contained and prioritize what is visible. You discount your own internal standards and elevate external reactions. You begin to perform instead of act. You adjust behavior not based on what is right, but on what is recognized. And over time, this erodes your alignment. You lose track of what you would do if no one were watching. This is the cost of needing recognition. It fragments your decision-making. It introduces hesitation. It replaces clarity with calculation. You start asking, will this be seen? Instead of, is this correct? And once that shift occurs, your actions are no longer guided by principle, they are guided by anticipation. Anticipation of approval. But approval is not a stable endpoint. It moves. What is praised today is ignored tomorrow. What gains attention in one environment is dismissed in another. If you chase recognition, you are forced to continuously adapt to changing standards that you do not define. You become flexible in the wrong direction, bending toward perception instead of holding to principle. So you are left with a paradox: the more you seek recognition to confirm your worth, the less stable your sense of worth becomes. Because you are outsourcing it. The Stoic response is not to reject recognition outright, but to reclassify it. It is not evidence. It is not validation. It is not a measure of your value. It is simply an external event, neutral in itself, unreliable as a signal, and irrelevant to your internal standard. This reclassification changes everything. Now, when recognition comes, it does not inflate you. When it is absent, it does not diminish you. Because it no longer occupies a central role in your self-assessment. It becomes peripheral, noticed, but not needed. And in that shift, your foundation stabilizes. You no longer wait to be seen before you act. You act, and whether it is seen becomes secondary. You no longer measure yourself by response. You measure yourself by alignment. Did you think clearly? Did you act correctly? Did you maintain discipline? These are questions you can answer without anyone else. And that is the point. Because the moment your worth depends only on what you can control, it becomes immune to what you cannot. You do not merely want recognition, you depend on it to resolve uncertainty about yourself. Without it, your actions feel incomplete. You finish something, but instead of closure, there is a pause. A waiting. As if the action itself is not enough until it is acknowledged. This is where the dependency deepens. Because now recognition is no longer just desirable, it becomes functional. You use it to finalize your efforts, to confirm that what you did counts. And without that confirmation, doubt fills the gap. You begin to question not just the outcome, but the action itself. Was it good enough? Was it meaningful? Did it matter? Notice what is happening. The value of your action is no longer determined at the moment of execution. It is deferred, outsourced to a later response from others. This creates a delay between doing and knowing. And in that delay, instability grows. The Stoic position removes this delay entirely. An action is complete the moment it aligns with reason and intention. Its value is determined internally, at the point of execution, not externally, at the point of reaction. There is no waiting period. No dependency on feedback. No need for confirmation. But you resist this. Because internal judgment feels less convincing than external approval. When you tell yourself that you acted correctly, it feels subjective. Biased. Possibly wrong. But when someone else says it, it feels solid. Reliable. As if truth requires multiple voices to be valid. This is the miscalibration. You trust external voices more than your own reasoning, not because they are more accurate, but because they are external. Because they appear independent of you. And that independence creates the illusion of objectivity. But external judgment is not objective, it is simply detached from your perspective. It carries its own distortions, its own limitations. Yet you elevate it above your own direct awareness of your actions. So you split your authority. Part of you acts. Another part waits for permission to accept that action as valid. And until that permission arrives, you remain in a suspended state, uncertain, incomplete, unresolved. This is not a flaw in your ability. It is a flaw in your structure. You have positioned yourself as a participant in your own life, but not the authority over it. Consider a simple example. You complete a difficult task, something that required focus, discipline, and effort. In isolation, this is sufficient. The action meets your standard. It reflects your intent. It is complete. But instead of concluding there, you check for response. Did anyone notice? Did anyone comment? Did anyone acknowledge it? If the answer is yes, you feel relief. If the answer is no, you feel doubt. Nothing about the action has changed. Only the response. And yet your evaluation shifts entirely. This reveals the dependency clearly. Your judgment is not anchored to the action, it is anchored to the reaction. Which means your sense of worth is not tied to what you do, but to how it is received. And reception is not within your control. So you are again building on instability. The Stoic correction is not to ignore feedback entirely, but to reposition it. Feedback can inform. It can refine. It can provide perspective. But it cannot define. Definition must remain internal. Because only you have full access to your intent, your effort, your reasoning. Others see fragments. You see the whole. Yet you defer to fragments over the whole because they are external. This inversion must be corrected. You must become the final authority on whether your action meets your standard. Not in a self-congratulatory way. Not by lowering the bar. But by applying consistent, rational evaluation to your own behavior, independent of response. This requires discipline. Because it is easier to wait for approval than to define your own criteria. It is easier to accept praise than to assess yourself honestly. External validation simplifies the process. Internal judgment demands rigor. But only one leads to stability. Once you remove the need for recognition as a closing mechanism, your actions become self-contained again. You act, you evaluate, you conclude. No delay. No dependency. No waiting. And this changes your relationship with effort. You no longer perform for acknowledgment. You act for alignment. The satisfaction comes from execution, not reception. Completion is internal, not external. This does not make recognition meaningless, it makes it optional. And optional things cannot control you. Because the moment something is no longer required to stabilize your sense of self, it loses its power to destabilize it. So the dependency breaks, not by rejecting recognition, but by removing its function. It is no longer needed to tell you who you are. You say you want recognition, but what you are actually seeking is reassurance that you are not insignificant. Recognition is only the surface expression of a deeper concern, that without acknowledgement, you might not matter. So you try to secure evidence. You look for signs, attention, praise, inclusion, response. Each one becomes a signal that you exist in the perception of others. And that perception becomes a substitute for certainty. If they see you, you must be real. If they value you, you must have value. But this logic carries a hidden dependency. It assumes that your significance must be witnessed to be valid. This is where the distortion intensifies. Because now absence of recognition is no longer neutral, it becomes threatening. Silence is interpreted as dismissal. Lack of response becomes a statement about your worth. You begin to read meaning into gaps, into delays, into omissions. And most of that meaning is negative. Not because it is accurate, but because it fills uncertainty. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. The less recognition you receive, the more you question your value. The more you question your value, the more you seek recognition. And the more you seek it, the more sensitive you become to its absence. So even neutral situations begin to feel like rejection. This is not a problem of external reality. It is a problem of internal interpretation. You are assigning weight to absence, treating it as evidence, when in fact it is often nothing. People fail to respond for countless reasons unrelated to you: distraction, priority shifts, limited awareness, competing concerns. But you collapse all of those possibilities into a single conclusion: it must be me. This is not reasoning. This is projection. And projection thrives in the absence of internal certainty. If you were clear about your own standard, if you had already determined the value of your actions, then external silence would remain what it is: absence of response, not presence of judgment. But because you have not closed the loop internally, you leave space for external interpretation to define the outcome. This is the vulnerability. You are not just waiting for recognition, you are exposed to misinterpretation. Every gap becomes a question mark. Every delay becomes a potential negative verdict. And because you are already dependent on external signals, you treat these imagined verdicts as real. So your emotional state fluctuates, not based on events, but based on interpretations of incomplete information. This is instability at its highest level. The Stoic correction addresses this directly: do not assign meaning where there is no clear evidence. And more importantly, do not treat absence as evidence. Silence is not a statement. Lack of recognition is not a verdict. It is simply non-participation. But you resist this because it removes a source of information you have been relying on. Even if that information is unreliable, it feels better than uncertainty. So you continue to interpret, to infer, to construct narratives that explain why recognition is missing. And most of those narratives diminish you. This is unnecessary. Because the moment you establish internal criteria for your actions, you eliminate the need to interpret absence. You already know whether your effort met your standard. You already know whether your behavior aligned with your principles. There is no gap to fill. No uncertainty to resolve. External response becomes supplementary, not decisive. Consider again the structure. If your worth depends on being seen, then not being seen becomes a problem. But if your worth is grounded in what you control, your reasoning, your discipline, your choices, then visibility becomes irrelevant to value. You still exist. You still act. You still maintain your standard. Nothing essential is lost. But your mind resists this shift because it removes a familiar mechanism. You are used to scanning the environment for signals. You are used to adjusting based on feedback. You are used to treating others as mirrors. And without those mirrors, you feel unreflected. But reflection is not the same as existence. You do not require confirmation to be valid. You require clarity. Clarity about what you are doing, why you are doing it, and whether it meets your own standard. Once that clarity is established, the need to interpret external silence disappears. Because there is nothing left unresolved. You are no longer asking, "Do they see me?" You are answering, "I see what I am doing." And that is sufficient. You believe recognition will stabilize you, but in practice, it trains you to become more unstable. Not because recognition is harmful in itself, but because of how you position it within your structure. You treat it as reinforcement. Every time you receive acknowledgement, your behavior is strengthened, not based on its correctness, but based on its visibility. You begin to associate being seen with being right. So you repeat what gets attention and quietly abandon what does not. This is how drift begins. At first, the adjustments are small. You emphasize certain traits because they are noticed. You suppress others because they are ignored. You refine your expression, not to improve clarity, but to increase response. And over time, this shifts your internal alignment. You are no longer acting from principle. You are acting from reinforcement patterns. This creates a subtle but critical separation between what is effective and what is recognized. Because the two are not the same. What is effective is determined by function. Does it work? Is it correct? Does it align with reason? What is recognized is determined by perception. Does it attract attention? Does it appeal? Does it stand out? And perception is volatile. So if you allow recognition to shape your behavior, you begin to prioritize what is noticeable over what is correct. You optimize for visibility, not validity. And this leads to distortion. You start performing. Not in the obvious sense of pretending, but in the structural sense of orienting your actions toward an audience. Even when no one is present, the imagined observer remains. You anticipate reactions. You simulate responses. You adjust accordingly. This is internalized observation. And it changes how you act. Instead of asking, "What is the right action here?" you begin to ask, "How will this be received?" That question introduces hesitation. It introduces calculation. It introduces a second layer of processing that interferes with direct execution. This is inefficiency. More importantly, it is misalignment. Because the moment your action is shaped by anticipated recognition, it is no longer fully your own. It is partially constructed for others. And anything constructed for others carries dependency on their response. So even before recognition occurs, you are already influenced by it. This is the deeper trap. You do not just react to recognition, you pre-adjust for it. You filter your thoughts before expressing them. You modify your behavior before acting. You select options not because they are best, but because they are more likely to be acknowledged. This reduces clarity. Because clarity requires direct engagement with reality, not filtered through imagined perception. When you act based on what is correct, your decision process is clean. When you act based on what will be recognized, your decision process becomes layered and indirect. And indirect processes are weaker. They introduce doubt. They introduce second guessing. They introduce inconsistency. Because you are no longer anchored to a fixed standard, you are adapting to variable expectations. The Stoic correction is not subtle. Remove recognition as a guiding factor in decision-making. Not by ignoring it entirely, but by refusing to let it influence the initial action. You act based on reason. You evaluate based on principle. Recognition, if it comes, is processed afterward, without altering the foundation. This restores alignment. Now your behavior is consistent across contexts. It does not change based on audience. It does not shift based on potential visibility. It remains stable because it is grounded in something constant, your internal standard. And this stability produces a different kind of strength. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer adjusting mid-action based on imagined outcomes. You execute directly, cleanly, without fragmentation. This does not make you rigid. It makes you precise. Because precision is not about inflexibility, it is about removing unnecessary variables. And recognition, when treated as a variable in decision-making, is unnecessary. It does not improve the correctness of your action. It only alters its presentation. So you eliminate it from the process. And in doing so, you remove a major source of distortion. You stop performing for an audience that may not even be there. You stop anticipating reactions that may never occur. You stop adjusting for perceptions that you cannot control. And your actions become simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You know what you are doing. You know why you are doing it. And you no longer require external reinforcement to continue. Because the action sustains itself. And when something sustains itself, it does not depend on recognition to persist. You assume that without recognition, motivation will collapse. That if no one sees, no one praises, no one acknowledges, then effort will lose its force. This assumption keeps you tied to external validation, because you believe it is the fuel for action. But this is a misinterpretation of what sustains effort. Recognition can stimulate action, but it cannot sustain disciplined consistency. It creates spikes, not stability. You act when attention is present. You slow when it fades. You accelerate under observation. You drift in isolation. This is not motivation. This is dependency on stimulus. And stimulus-driven behavior is inherently inconsistent. It relies on conditions that fluctuate. So your output fluctuates with it. High when seen. Low when unseen. Focused when praised. Uncertain when ignored. This pattern prevents depth. Because depth requires sustained engagement beyond initial stimulation. It requires continuation without reinforcement. It requires the ability to act in the absence of response, and to maintain direction without feedback. Recognition does not train this. It interrupts it. Each time you receive external validation, it resets your internal pacing. It introduces a reward expectation. It conditions you to associate effort with response. So when the response is absent, the effort feels incomplete. You begin to hesitate. Not because you lack ability, but because the expected reinforcement is missing. The system you have built requires it. And without it, the system stalls. This is why you feel less motivated when no one is watching. Not because the work has lost value, but because your structure has tied value to visibility. The Stoic correction dismantles this linkage. Effort is not sustained by recognition, it is sustained by commitment to a standard. A standard that does not change based on observation. A standard that does not require acknowledgement to remain valid. This is a different source of energy. It is quieter, less reactive, but far more stable. When you act from this position, the presence or absence of recognition does not alter your output. You do not need to be seen to continue. You do not need to be praised to persist. The action is anchored internally, not externally. This creates continuity. You begin to operate at a consistent level regardless of context. Public or private. Observed or unobserved. Acknowledged or ignored. The variability disappears because the driver is constant. This is discipline. And discipline is not fueled by emotion or response, it is maintained by structure. By repeated alignment with your own criteria. By executing what you have already determined to be correct. This removes hesitation. You no longer wait for the right conditions. You no longer depend on external triggers. You act because the action meets your standard, not because it will be recognized. And over time, this builds a different form of confidence. Not the kind that rises with praise and falls with silence, but the kind that accumulates through consistent execution. You trust your process because it does not depend on variables outside your control. This trust is self-reinforcing. Each action completed without the need for recognition strengthens the system. Each moment of discipline without external reward confirms that the structure holds. And gradually, the expectation of recognition weakens. Not because you suppress it, but because you no longer need it. This is the shift. You move from externally stimulated action to internally sustained action. From reactive effort to consistent execution. From dependence on response to independence of process. And this independence changes how you experience your own work. You no longer feel incomplete when unseen. You no longer question the value of your effort in the absence of praise. You no longer slow down because recognition is missing. Because recognition was never the source of value. It was only a signal you misinterpreted. Now, the signal is irrelevant. The action stands on its own. And because it stands on its own, it continues, without interruption, without hesitation, without dependency. This is what allows effort to scale. Because anything that depends on external reinforcement is limited by the availability of that reinforcement. But anything that sustains itself can expand without constraint. So your capacity increases. Not because you receive more recognition, but because you require less of it. And in that reduction, your output becomes consistent, your direction becomes clear, and your dependence dissolves. You no longer need to be seen to continue. You continue because it is correct. You began with the assumption that recognition proves your worth. But what you have seen is that recognition is unstable, inconsistent, and outside your control. To depend on it is to build on something that shifts without warning. So the correction is not emotional, it is structural. You remove recognition from the foundation of your self-assessment. You stop using it to confirm your value, to complete your actions, to stabilize your motivation. And in doing so, you close every gap where dependency once formed. What remains is entirely within your control, your judgment, your discipline, your alignment with principle. This is enough. Because worth does not need to be witnessed to exist. It does not require acknowledgement to be real. It is established in the moment you act correctly, and it remains, whether seen or not. You no longer wait to be recognized. You act, and that is sufficient.